Continuing our conversation that we were having earlier about the DEI initiatives and why conservatives are suddenly attacking this. When we saw this at the Supreme Court last year, when suddenly affirmative action, which is settled law in colleges and universities, conservative groups started attacking that, saying that it was discriminatory against, in of all situations, Asian American students, because they claimed that Harvard and other Ivy League schools were attacking and discriminating against entirely too many Asians by letting too many black people in. That was the crux of their argument. And by packing the Supreme Court with 6 conservative justices, they were able to overturn settled law, regardless of precedents, regardless of stare decisis, because they have an activist court. We're seeing them going after now diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at major corporations and government. And this all traces back to the response that Republicans had to President Barack Obama being elected. And you guys know I've been critical of President Obama plenty over the years. I've never been an Obama-lite who simply thought that he was the almighty come down to bring his heavenly touch to us, but I can acknowledge the things that he did that were positives for the American people and positives for our community in particular. One of the initiatives that President Obama's administration did was review the entirety of the federal government's hiring processes, and then put together diversity, equity, and inclusion audits of federal agencies, and then put through that hiring initiatives to help diversify the field. So we saw the FAA, for example, have to start hiring African-American air traffic controllers. That was spearheaded by Janice Mathis and the Rainbow Push Coalition at the time. We saw the federal agencies start to have to report how many minorities they were hiring for different positions. And this angered conservative groups. Indeed, conservative groups have been in litigation for over a decade to try to reverse the efforts of President Obama to diversify the federal workforce. In addition to that, he put together a council which reviewed diversity and equity and inclusion initiatives at major corporations around the country. As a result of this, if you look at the boards of directors of major corporations, they are now more diverse than ever. They put together pipeline programs to help college students major in the degrees that were needed in order to make sure they were qualified for those jobs, and they would meet those merit-based goals that were necessary in order to get them into the workforce. Now, of course, there's no such thing as a zero-sum game, because you're now including more blacks, more Latinos, more Arab Americans, more women. The people who suffered, of course, are straight white men who are of wealthy backgrounds. So traditionally, these people were used to their American dream, that you will graduate from a major institution after playing lacrosse or something, and then your dad will get you a job at a major investment banking firm. After a couple years there, you'll work your way to partner. You'll be making a $500,000 to $1 million by the time you're 27 years old, and then you'll proceed through your career on from there on to retirement. And those are a very safe, very easy way of life. Well, now, having to compete with these minorities all of a sudden, these individuals who are used to this life of privilege now see that as being discrimination. They think that them having to compete with students who do not come from their background constitutes discrimination against them, constitutes attacks against them. And this is why they started attacking places like Harvard and Ivy League institutions, because they believe literally that they have a birthright to those seats in those places. You can look at the situation with the black farmers, for example. President Biden has been criticized for pledging $10 billion to black farmers and that money not arriving. Well, that's not President Biden's fault. The fault of that lies with groups that are spearheaded by people like Stephen Miller, former Trump acolyte, who have been in active litigation against the federal government to stop them from being able to distribute these billions of dollars to African-American farmers in order to bring them to equity with other communities. It's not about putting them ahead of anybody, but it's about trying to get them at least to even the playing field. Now, these black farmers are absolutely as qualified as any white farmer to do all of these things that are required. There's not a merit-based question. It is simply a question of trying to reverse the wrongs in the past to bridge those gaps that exist so we can have a more fair and equal society. Republicans, conservatives, and particularly white supremacists view the conceptualization of a fair and equal society to be tantamount to discrimination and oppression of white people in this country. And as long as we allow them to continue to conflate programs that are meant to ameliorate past harms and past discrimination, and also current harm and current discrimination with the same ills that they are meant to remedy. We're going to continue to get these attacks on things such as critical race theory, Black Lives Matter, diversity, equity, inclusion. They will make all of those things evil because we have suddenly this view in parts of America that the white people are under attack. And this isn't something that I am making up. You can look at any conservative newspaper or website. They legitimately believe that white people are being attacked in the streets, that white people are being targeted for violence, that white people are being discriminated against, that white people are slowly but surely not just moving to a place of equity, but being put behind everybody else. This is what happens when you're in a position of privilege, and even the slightest amount of privilege is taken away. The lack of privilege is seen as being discrimination now. So what do we do about it? Well, one, you have to confront it head on. The mistake that our community made, particularly when it came to critical race theory, was when we heard them start making a big deal about it, we said, oh, that's stupid. Nobody's going to believe that. And then we moved on from it. We thought that nobody could possibly dumb enough to believe that teaching kids about the civil rights movement or teaching kids about what happened during slavery, that somehow that would turn into a massive movement to motivate people to turn out to vote and to change laws around the country. It did. We dropped the ball on it. The same thing happened with Black Lives Matter, where we took a movement that was meant to be to change laws nationwide to stop police brutality and over-policing of Black communities. We allowed it to be co-opted. We allowed it to be taken over. We allowed it to be mutilated and altered to the point that it suddenly became a movement about Marxism and destroying the nuclear family. It became a movement about communism and all sorts of other things that had nothing to do with the core issue of passing legislation that would stop Black people from being shot by police. This is why it's so important that we maintain our own media outlets, we maintain our own voice, and we're able to structure our own narrative. Because as long as you allow someone else to speak with you, they will speak for you, they will speak in their voice. And we're seeing that exact same thing happen with diversity, equity, and inclusion now, to the point that people believe that any efforts to diversify workforces counts as a DEI effort. They think that if you see any Black person in any job, it's almost like we're back to the 80s, where they call you an affirmative action hire. They think you're a diversity hire as opposed to you being more qualified than them. You'll see the lowest person on the totem pole think that they are more qualified than the highest Black person on a totem pole, simply because they've been fed this nonsense about diversity, equity, and inclusion programs being discriminatory against them, discriminatory against their people, and discriminatory against their way of life. As we are seeing America become a majority-minority nation, these things will accelerate. Just as we saw the Black Lives Matter start around 2010 to 2011, whether you trace it from the death of Troy Davis, the death of Trayvon Martin, up until 2020, when it became the real boogeyman for the political right, these things metastasize over time. So it's important for us to understand the fight that we have ahead of us and to fight back against it now. Don't wait until they've been able to set the narrative, because by then they will already have begun the process of pushing us out of schools, pushing us out of jobs, pushing us out of leadership positions, and setting the clock back to give them some more time to figure out what to do about becoming America's new minority group. We'll talk more about this after the break. News and Talk 1380 WAOK.